Welcome to episode 4 of the Triple Takeover Toycast. This week we're going to be talking about toy displays. And of course this is somewhat influenced by the impending arrival of a massive planet-sized transformer on many collectors' doorsteps. I am joined here on episode 4 by toy writer and photographer Liam from Toybox Soapbox.
Waka waka.
And toy writer, photographer and YouTuber Sixo.
Hello indeed.
Lads, how's it going?
All good here, thanks. Not too bad. So, still locked down at the moment, but got a bit of new toy joy going on with old Kingdom Air Razor, so that's quite exciting.
Liam, how are you doing?
Yeah, really good, thanks. I'm still sat here with a now slightly smaller Titan class glass of wine, but, all good, thank you very much.
Hang on a minute, I just mentioned Beast Wars there, and I fully anticipated both of you stepping up to the plate to show your level of interest, but you just kind of glossed over it, M.A.S. I'm surprised.
That's our level of interest.
I was just about to say, that level of ambivalence has now just permeated to the point where...
It's unbelievable, honestly, absolutely
just
unbelievable.
Ignorance now.
I will get you both talking about Beast Wars at some point, I tell you.
Now, toy displays versus storing toys. This is a topic that every collector probably struggles with. There are creative solutions. There are desperate solutions. We've all got our toy displays, and sometimes it's dictated by circumstance. Sometimes we are lucky enough to be able to display our collections in exactly the way we want to. But inevitably, at some point, we're going to end up with toys in storage, or the worst possible thing, moving collections between homes or even rooms. So I think it would be an interesting place to start by talking about why we display toys at all. It's one of the distinguishing factors between having toys as a kid, playing with them, and then being asked to put them away, and you put them in storage until they're needed again and you pull them out again. As adult collectors and people who enjoy toys, we set up displays. And why do we do that?
Yeah, it is a bit of a weird one, and I think it's a really interesting point versus how we are, with toys as kids, or I suppose, moreover, how we as adults teach our kids to be, if that makes sense. Because certainly with us, like, we have little toy chests and stuff for our boy, do you know what I mean? And it's like a nightly thing, like tidying up, putting all the toys away, etc. But we don't really get him to put them back on display or anything like that. So, but he does obviously see my display, and so he knows that that's what I do as well. And I do think that there is a little bit of that creeping in with him. He does seem to like putting certain cars and things like that up on the top of his drawers, stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe I am influencing him a little bit as well. But yeah, it's definitely a strange one for adults. It's something very particular we do. I guess maybe it's let's be honest, like a little bit of showing off almost. It's like you've created this, you've curated this thing, you've kind of put all these different pieces together, and it's nice to just kind of have it to look at and kind of, in all its magnificence, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I agree with you on influencing your child with the way that you display your toys, because I think about my daughter's room, and of course she is asked to put her toys away, mainly for my safety when I'm in there. But she also has displays. She has Lego displays. She has displays of her OMG and LOL dolls, neither of which you'll be familiar with unless you have a daughter.
That's another episode, I think, right
there. But Liam, does your dog have his toys on display?
She's literally just walked in the door as you've said that. That's why I keep looking down. But she does have many toys on display around this house. Like they're literally over every floor, every step, every surface. There's either a teddy, a ball, or some previously destroyed thing.
Actually, that reminds me of Sixo's interview that I did with him for TF Source, how his entire collection was displayed on his stairs.
That was hilarious, man, because I swear, for like a year or more after that, people were still asking me if I actually displayed those toys on the stairs. Like it wasn't a specific
really?
Thing that was... Yeah, I got a lot of questions about that, saying, but how do you get upstairs? Like, don't you tread on them? And I'm like, well, dude, they're not like just permanently on the stairs. It took forever, my wife and I, putting them all out over the stairs and everything. So, which was, a lot of fun. And then trying to get, round to kind of not tread on them, doing the photo shoot and whatever. But yeah, no, tons of questions about it. I think people just assume that I left them there the whole time, which is kind of bizarre.
So, Liam, why do you display your toys?
See, I'm not really convinced that I do display them. I think it's more of a storage thing for me because, like most people, like yourselves, you've both got very nice cabinets and stuff. I have it because it's a lot easier to store, sort of vertically, and I don't know, it's a lot easier to reach when taking photos of things and just pull something off the shelf than having to root for a box.
So, does it not? Like, is your enjoyment of your collection not affected by how they visibly appear at the times when you're not interacting with them directly?
No, not at all. Like, if you were to look at my shelves, you'll find it. They started out with, you'd start out with a series, don't you? And you try and group them together. It's all very earnest at the beginning, but then it just keeps growing and growing. And eventually you're just chucking things on wherever they fit. And it's like, oh, there's a tiny bit there with no dust. Let's put a huffer there. And that's just how it goes.
You see, already that's almost completely the opposite to the way I display my toys. Because I know that if I have too much on display where I don't feel like things are getting their room to breathe or they don't look the way I want them to, and I know when I'm overcrowding a shelf, I know the root cause of that is that I bought too many toys. I probably got a few too many on display, but I don't want to put it in storage. And that does start to affect how much I can enjoy my collection.
Really? See, you should come around here because mine look like a crushing crowd at like Leeds or Download or something like that. They're all just crushed in as far as they can get.
I think, I suppose I'm going to throw it out there, but do you guys think that maybe, certainly with Liam, because I can identify with some of that the photographer in us, and it might just be an us thing, do you know what I mean? Because not everybody's a photographer, obviously there are plenty of them out there, but, maybe it's just that kind of practicality element that you were saying, Liam, that you kind of, it's not so much about having them nicely on display so that you can look at them, but there is that kind of ease of use, if you want to get to a particular toy or whatever, do you know what I mean, for the photography, which, I don't know, certainly in my case, is a big part of it as well, because it's so, like, at the forefront of how I interact with them.
Well, yeah, and it's a convenience thing, isn't it? It's just being able to sort of turn around and grab something rather than having to kind of, like, search for it. And it's just, yeah, when I'm taking photos, a lot of the time, it'll be the same for you both. You just something will pop into your mind, and it's a lot easier to just grab it if it's there, versus if you've, I don't know, got it locked away or something, I suppose.
I remember certainly having quite a few toys in a particular row, and they were accessible in that they weren't even behind a cabinet. In the last apartment we lived in, they were just on a surface. So, a lot of the MP level toys and the third-party toys that I was photographing for review, I could just reach for them. But the problem was there were so many of them out there that by reaching for one, I would inevitably knock a few others over. It just became this expensive game of dominoes. One of the appeals of having a collection spaced out for me is that if I do want to grab something, there's no obstructions to it. And there are just a couple of shelves I have, like G1 cars and one of the variant shelves, where there's so much packed in there that it is a little bit discouraging for me to actually go and grab something, even if I know I want to photograph it.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. To be honest, I probably end up somewhere between the two of you. Do you know what I mean? In that I do like having them on display, and I do like kind of grouping them so that they're, in an order that suits me in my brain anyway. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure some people would look at it and question the logic of it, no doubt, but that's fine. But, like particularly with the G1, it's nice to kind of have them kind of sitting in, with their respective kind of sublines and whatever else. But equally, I do like the kind of practicality of having them to hand so that I can photograph them when I want. Having said that, they are pretty crowded in my display, and that is just purely on account of, the number of toys that need to fit into a certain space at the end of the day. There's only, you kind of get to the point where actually realistically spacing them out anymore, or having, as you were sort of saying, Maz, not overcrowding the shelves, and particularly not having that domino thing, that's long gone here. And I guess realistically, yes, it would be nice. It would be lovely to have them all kind of, with much more space in between each one or whatever else, but it's just not doable, I don't think, anymore. I don't know where I would, I'd either have to significantly reduce the number of toys that I have, or get a lot more space.
I was just going to say, do you not find that over time your sort of growing collection sort of outstrips the space you've got? Because like when I first got the shelves, some of it was to display stuff, but as time's gone on now, there's just stuff all over the floor because it can't fit, and it's different sizes, and it's just grown to a point where they've sort of changed the purpose.
Well, they say work expands to fill the time available, and toys expand to fill the space available. That's
They definitely do. They definitely do. I think my problem is that I frequently will kind of change up a display or whatever, but then I almost kind of get it to how I want it to fit the toys that I currently have, and I'm not very good at like leaving space for the stuff that might be incoming. Do you know what I mean? Particularly when you get into the kind of review game. Do you know what I mean? And obviously you've got stuff turning up and whatever else. That obviously makes it more difficult as well. And I think that's quite common actually. I think there are people that specifically leave, like you already kind of hinted at Unicron. I know there are people that have been trying to make space for Unicron for when it arrives, but there are equally plenty of people I know that are just like winging it. That thing turns up on the doorstep and it's washing machine size box, and then they're like, okay, where am I going to actually put this now? Do you know what I mean? And I'm probably in that category a little bit, to be honest.
That's why people have gardens, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Build it a
Just
shed.
for Unicron.
Well, this is the thing. Like, is there a distinction between people buying toys and it being satisfying and enjoying enough to know that they have them? I have this toy. It's somewhere. It's either in storage or on display or behind something or under something. And is there a distinction between people who buy toys, but they only buy things that they know that they can enjoy visually, practically, and have it not create an extra display conundrum to solve? For example, I know when I've got too many toys because I'm looking at my display. I know there's no more space to be had there. By cramming them in, I sacrifice the integrity of the display and what I want it to look like. And if I put it in storage, I'm not enjoying it anymore. Not the way I want to, anyway. And I wish that I would employ that kind of thinking a bit more diligently when buying toys. Because, I've just gone and bought these Studio Series toys and a few Kingdoms, because of the 1986 movie line that they've done. And it's escalated to the point where I've now got nowhere to put them. And they all just arrived in such a short period of time. Suddenly there's like Hot Rod Cup, Blur, Grimlock, Scourge, Cyclonus, and Alicon. And they're just everywhere, in my opinion. They're crowding my desk now. And I know that I don't have space in my display behind me, my vintage display. So what, do I store them? But is there a difference for you guys in knowing that you have the toy and then being able to display it?
Yeah, to some extent. I think it depends what it is. Like with Studio Series or with Generations or whatever, I actually don't put those in my display. And some people, I don't know, maybe would hear that and think differently or be disappointed by that or whatever, but I am slightly particular with what goes in the cabinets and whatever else, just because of the space. There is no more space ultimately, so you have to kind of pick and choose. That said, I don't necessarily want to completely downsize or get to the point where it's one in, one out or whatever in terms of the collection. So stuff like Generations, I don't know, for me those are toys to kind of enjoy, not just on display, if that makes sense. They're like fiddle formers, you pick them up, you have fun with it, you put it back. But they're not toys necessarily that I would put in a cabinet or whatever, do you know what I mean? And kind of have on display in the same way that I would, a lot of Generation 1 stuff. And literally I've got 4 cabinets, 3 of them are vintage, it's the vintage stuff. And 1 is Masterpiece. And it used to be more 50-50, but it's kind of just swung that way. And I think that's because, naturally what I can see myself doing over time is prioritizing the stuff that is, I suppose, it's more valuable or that, kind of feels a bit more special or whatever else. And the kind of new toys coming in, I just find a different way to store them, but still kind of look after them, if that makes sense. Not just, chuck them in a box.
Yeah. With sort of Generation stuff, I buy the figure first. I don't think about displaying it. I buy it and I know it's going to go on a shelf somewhere, but it never enters my head. It's just, I suppose it's that collector mentality, isn't it? You are buying the next thing you want or you need, I suppose. Need is a bad word, but it's that, you are on this path and you keep picking up these characters and different toys. And so the displaying of them is secondary because once I get it, I know it's going on the shelf. And you do see people, don't you, where they do buy lots of toys in boxes and they don't even open them for years and stuff, and they just kind of put them in rooms.
I still haven't transformed Fort Max. I just thought I'd drop that in there.
But that's a bit of a special case. That's like a massive toy. That's a one-off. That's not normal.
That is exactly why he's still in the box, because I don't have a display spot for him. And it is actually genuinely affecting my enjoyment of it because I can't enjoy it. It's just something that I know I could take it out of the box, transform it, have fun with it, but then I'd have to put it back in its styro, back in the box, shove it back into the corner where there's space for it. And that's definitely affecting it.
I was just going to say, sorry, just about the styro, because actually that's really interesting. Did you know that, and I think it was in that interview about Unicron, that's why they gave it styro, apparently. Unicron was so that people can take it in and out of the box, because exactly what you're saying now is the same conundrum people are having about Unicron, of course. And that's why I think they thought, okay, if people are going to need to put this back in the packaging, we'll put it in styro so that it's easy to get in and out.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And you were saying that with some of the new toys that arrive, the things that you've got in your display are maybe a bit more valuable, a bit more special. But that's a consideration too, isn't it? It's you put the things behind glass that maybe need that protection, that need a little bit more breathing space. They need a little bit more considered storage. And even though it's visible storage, it's still, in a way, protection and storage, because it's not a new generation's toy that you could just put in a desk. And, if it's not got a lot of paint apps, it's not going to chip paint. But you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't pile, a bunch of painted new masterpiece toys on top of each other and put them in a drawer or a box or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, the generation stuff, most of it anyway, certainly 90% of it, I will also share with my son, and let him have a go with them and what have you. They don't stay in
durable,
his
aren't they?
room. Yeah, certainly more so, yeah. Certainly more so than Masterpiece or Generation 1, definitely. I mean, he does look at the other stuff as well, do you know what I mean? But it's the the War for Cybertron and whatever, those are the toys that we actually play with together, other than the ones that are his, and stay in his room. And he's had a go on them, and I've left him to it, of course. But they always kind of go back into the room with the rest of my collection, etc. So, but they are different in that regard. So I suppose it would feel really weird to me, and probably a bit confusing to him as well, to have them to be playing with them, then me be like, okay, now let's put them back behind the glass, And it's almost like there's a distinction there for him a little bit, if that sort of makes sense.
It does. Imagine there wasn't any glass, though. If we're just talking about a shelf, then it's
like mine.
Do you think it would? Yeah. It's just a bit more obviously that. You know what? Maybe it's not obvious, because the first thing that Liam said was that that's just basically his storage for them. So I was just wondering, it's possible to enjoy the toy, to play with it, enjoy it with your son, or me enjoying it with my daughter, and then when we're done playing with it, it kind of goes back in a display, and then it's being enjoyed as part of a display. Especially if there's a number of figures of the same line, set up in a particular way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible as well. I suppose it really all comes down to your priorities as a collector, doesn't it? And kind of the figures that you see as, as you said, the most valuable, whatever that metric of value is, whether that's monetary or just, their kind of your sort of emotional connection or enjoyment with them or whatever it may be. I think whatever that sort of metric of value is, that's ultimately what you're going to prioritize the most in terms of putting it on display somehow. It's naturally going to be the toys that you want to, whether you kind of think about it that much or not, it's going to be the toys that you want to have out on, isn't it? Those are going to be the ones that you prioritize for a display.
If you're buying toys for a particular series, it's quite natural to display them together. But then if you get something that's not part of that series, would you then, but it's valuable to you and you really like it, you went out of your way to get it maybe, would you still put that in your display, or would you then find a different solution for that because it doesn't necessarily fit in with the theme of what you've got in your display and that value metric that you're talking about?
I think for me it's a bit of both. I mean, I have stuff in the cabinets that isn't, it's maybe a one-off or whatever. I don't know. I think my brain can always find some logic with it, to try and tie it in. I mean, yeah, there is stuff definitely that doesn't quite fit in one way or another. But, for example, I mean, maybe it's not the best example, but I only have one Galaxy Force or Cybertron toy, and that's the Optimus, the Convoy. And that sits quite nicely with the rest of the toys from that era. I mean, some people would say, oh, you need, that in a Galaxy Force display or whatever, but that's fine for me. I mean, I also have a couple of third-party toys, which I would say are one-offs. They don't tie in with anything. There's a TFC Toys ST Commander, which is the kind of take on G.I. Joe Rolling Thunder. I don't know if either of you have seen it.
Yeah.
It's very cool, kind of green
I lost
Optimus
after
Prime.
that toy. It looks amazing.
It's amazing. It's really, really cool. Complete one-off for me. Now, they are doing a Megatron, actually, coming up, interestingly, so I have my eye on that. But, currently, that toy has been a complete one-off for a long time. And I've had it sitting with Generation 2, because I kind of thought, it's a bit Generation 2, kind of G.I. Joe as well. And so that was kind of the logic there. I've had it set somewhere else. I've had it on its own. I think it's whatever works for you, ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, like the amount of shelves I've got that have grown over the last couple of years. It's like I've got a whole shelving unit here where there's one shelf and it's got like Vinyl Tech, third-party stuff. There's Armada, all of these sort of different studio series, all these different toy lines. They're almost like refugees from the other shelves, kind of. They've got nowhere else to go, so they just kind of get lumped together. But it actually makes for a really nice display when you walk past them, because you just see, instead of seeing this, when I look to one side, there's quite a uniform, like the 1984 art crew of Earthrise or Generations are all together. But then when I look at this other side, there's this really varied kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like a cereal, like multicolors and just stuff like that. It's just quite nice to see.
Well, maybe does it depend then on how varied your collection is? Because like what you're describing, Liam, is, where you've got all of these kind of odds and sods left over that don't necessarily fit in wholesale into other bits of the display. But, clearly you've got a very varied collection, if you've got stuff like Vinyl Tech and whatever in there, whereas I don't necessarily have that. And I know Maz doesn't.
Not true.
So
not true.
Well, you've got some bits. You do have some.
The thing is, the top of my cabinets I have reserved purely for Macross, and in front of that, purely M.A.S.K. So I try to keep it in a way with a given formula. And then on the other side of the room where my PC is, there's a shelf above my PC, and that's purely Lego. And the tub that I have on my left is only Lego as well. And then on my PC, I mean, this sounds extremely messy the way I'm describing it, but I'm trying to keep them very distinct and not cluttered. I have some models from the Wipeout series of games. So I do have variety in what I have in the room, and it is actually quite important for me that I keep them distinctly to the areas that I've assigned them. And it's that kind of thing that stops me buying more of a particular thing. I can definitely attest to that. Like, I won't buy any more M.A.S.K right now because I'm not confident I can fit that into the display.
You should buy more. Do it now.
I really want to.
Right now. Right this moment.
I really do want to.
More M.A.S.K. Do you know, I can guarantee you there are people listening to this podcast saying, that doesn't sound messy at all to me. What you've just described, actually sounds very organized, mate. Well done. Because, there will be people that are like, I don't know, sleeping on a sea of plastic, basically. Do you know what I mean? That they just don't know what to do with their toys and whatever else. And that's not me knocking it. It's a struggle for a lot of people where to put this stuff ultimately. But I think you've got it more organized than most, I think.
The only way I managed to make it look that way originally was to store everything that didn't fit into the display. So when we moved into this apartment, I realized that I couldn't store or couldn't display any Titans Return or Legends. And I had nearly the full run of those two lines. And no third party was on display, and the Masterpiece stuff wasn't able to be displayed because I had enough vintage to take up the number of cabinets I had. And as the cabinets increased, they just got filled with the other vintage I had and was buying. And I realized that I didn't want to store things for years. And I just didn't feel that they were the kind of items that I prioritized enough anymore to rotate back into the display. And I know some collectors really successfully rotate displays and they keep it really fresh for themselves. And I respect people who are able to do that with discipline. And, it's a way of curating your own collection for your own display enjoyment. And I think that's awesome. But for me, I realized all that stuff that was in display, it eventually led me to sell that stuff because I had to ask myself, am I ever going to put this out on display again? If not, why do I still have it? Am I holding on to this dream of one day living in a big enough home that I can display all the Transformers that my heart desires? Well, then I'll buy them at that point. I think I told myself I'm just going to buy them at that point.
Would you ever want to live in a place like that, though? Like I've had that thought before where I'm like, oh, well, maybe one day, in a bigger house, more room. But then at what point? I mean, like, imagine living in, some sort of, I don't know, country manor or mansion or whatever. I mean, how big a display of toys do you ultimately want? At some point, it gets a bit gargantuan, right? Like, it gets beyond itself.
Does this country manor have a butler?
Hard to say, mate, but it'd be good if it did.
An Optimus Prime butler.
For your reference, it's taken 33 minutes for him to get to that stage, for him to bring it up. Actually, I love the idea of living in a place where one room would allow me to display the things that I want. And that's not a license to then go and buy things to the point where it's filled and messy again. I do have artwork that I can never display because I don't have enough wall space. And I would love to have a dedicated room where I could have all the Transformers and comic artwork that I have, all of the non-Transformers artwork that I have, and the Lego that I have, the video game related art that I have, and I've bought video game related art recently, and all the toy lines that I want to display, and even things related to my sim racing, a couple of trophies here and there. I'd love to have a room, but only a room. I really don't like the idea of it spilling into other rooms of the house, and I know that's something you're thinking about too.
No, definitely I am. We've talked about this before, and I'm not big on toys all over the house. Do you know what I mean? It's something that Liam's smirking. He's like, yeah. But
just see our living room.
Well, but we know people, and there are plenty of people that are the other way. They just have toys everywhere, and that's cool. If that's your thing. It's just for me personally. I don't know. Strange as this will sound to people, I'm sure that they won't believe me. Some people listening to this, but it's not my entire life. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are things in my existence that are not robot related, and so I guess for me, we're quite house proud, and having them absolutely everywhere it just doesn't kind of work for me mentally. Do you know what I mean? And it's not to say that I want them like shut away and whatever, but it's just, I suppose I like them to have their place. Do you know what I mean? And to look kind of neat and tidy. And the odd one, like in the living room, is not a big deal or whatever. But I can't imagine having them just running rampant.
Yeah, we don't have like sort of Transformers or anything like that downstairs. All the toys downstairs are mostly my girlfriend's. So it's more like like Labyrinth, Funko Pops, and things like that. Stuff that, I don't know, it's kind of more acceptable, isn't it, to have in a living room when you have people around and stuff. Baby Yoda, that sort of thing. Just everything dotted on the shelves amongst other accoutrements and stuff.
I used to have Transformers on display in the living room, and I really liked the way it looked. I had one Detolf cabinet next to the TV, one cabinet, and the bottom shelf of that was, I think it was MP1 and maybe Masterpiece MP3 Starscream as well. And then on another shelf, I had just a handful of eHobby exclusives. Then on one shelf, there was animated toys. And on one shelf, there was Bayformers. There was Human Alliance figures. And
I forgot you had Bayformers.
Yeah, no, I displayed them for a really long time. And I really enjoyed them for a really, really long time. But that was another victim of, what do I want to display now? What's going to have to end up in storage? What does that mean for these toys, really? Because when that was that one cabinet in the living room, and that was all that there was on display in the home, I really liked it. And I liked the way it was on show to people who came around, and it was really tightly curated display. But as soon as I had a room for Transformers, having them out of that room suddenly felt a little bit unfair. And also not the way I wanted it. I didn't want to see them everywhere in the home. I wanted them to have a dedicated space. Which brings me to something I wanted to ask you both. I think it leads nicely onto packaging. How do you store packaging? Do you keep packaging? Do you keep your toys in the packaging, in display, or in storage? What do you do with your packaging generally?
For me, it's a mix. It depends what it is. If it's like, say, Masterpiece or vintage, I try to keep it. But now I've noticed when I buy vintage stuff sort of secondhand, I try to find stuff without a box, not because it's cheaper, but because there's less of a temptation to keep hold of it. So I don't have to store it. It takes that decision away from me, really, because I find it really hard to get rid of things like that. But like with, say, Generation stuff, it just goes in the bin. It's like the best way for it. But then with Masterpiece, it's you think in the back of your mind, it's like, but if I sell it, that's more, I don't know, more valuable with the box, isn't it? You feel like people, it's an easier sell, I think, to other people.
It is an easier sell. And I did realize when I sold my Masterpiece toys that I was taking losses on things because I'd no longer had the boxes. I had this epiphany and just decided to get rid of all the Masterpiece packaging because it was huge and it took up so much cupboard space that freeing that cupboard space meant a great deal. But keeping it would have meant that I got more money when I sold it, But ultimately, the number of years that would have lived in our storage just to make those sales had a negative impact on our lifestyle and our living conditions.
Catch-22, isn't it? You just kind of,
Yes.
It's better for you to not have it, and you'd feel, I don't know, not happier as such, but you've got more space and everything like that, and it's less to look after. But at the same
there is
time,
an element. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say there is an element of like hanging on to stuff just for the sake of it, almost. Just because it'll be better to sell. But then if you're not going to sell it for like 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, it sort of negates itself. It's a bit pointless in a funny kind of way. So. But yeah, no, I'm the same. I do keep my masterpiece packaging because I love it and I really like that packaging. We're lucky enough to have a garage, so it goes in there quite neatly. Some vintage stuff I keep, typically for kind of more higher end stuff. So like Star Saber, things like that. Do you know what I mean? I would never get rid of that packaging. Same for a lot of like anything kind of Victory or things like that, Master Force, I typically keep, Fort Max. But then a lot of it I sell, actually, because you can get decent coin, back on whatever you've got for some vintage packaging if it's in good condition or whatever else. And if I'm only going to be like sticking it in a cupboard and not doing anything with it, but actually someone else really wants it, well, then it's a bit of mutual benefit, isn't it? It frees up my space. Someone else gets what they want. I get a bit of money back on whatever it is. So it works out quite well.
And with some of these things, the packaging is part of it, isn't it, as well? Like you say there with sort of the vintage Takara stuff, it's very special. So it's kind of part of owning it. Is you're not just keeping it for the sake of keeping it packaging. It's something really beautiful to look at, and it's such part definitely of getting that toy.
I think it really depends what it is. So, like something like Death Saurus, for example, I could never imagine parting ways with that packaging because there's something so immense about. And again, it's not just a monetary thing or whatever. It's probably just like a kind of very personal. Kind of going back to Holy Grails again a bit, I suppose. When you first get it, I can remember the kind of care of like sliding out the styrofoam from inside the cardboard, and just kind of and like going over all the little kind of manuals and whatever else, and just taking a lot of pleasure in that, really. And I still have that same vibe looking at that packaging, some of that Victory stuff or whatever. But I would love to keep all like boxes for Target Masters, Power Masters, all of that stuff as well, because I do love that packaging. But ultimately, you can't keep it all, right? Sacrifices have to be made.
No, and I do find myself doing what Liam was describing earlier and actively looking for loose but unused samples, which is a very hard niche to find toys in. But every now and then, when I do find one, it's like, that is perfect for me. And I found it with a Wreck-Gar recently. There was a seller in the US who, back in his childhood, him and his brother lived near a shop that sold Transformers loose because their packaging had been vandalized. So maybe a kid had stolen an accessory out of a packet or something like that, or stolen one cassette out of a double cassette pack, and the other cassette was, no longer sellable. So this store was just doing them at discount, and him and his brother bought loads of these toys, and they kept them in storage since the 80s. So every now and then he lists things, and I got an Override from him, and I got a Wreck-Gar from him, and I think also Windsweeper. And these toys were completely unused, had the sticker sheets, but no packaging. It took that decision away from me for what to do with it, and I just thought, perfect. I don't even have to worry about unsealing a toy because, contrary to popular belief, I actually don't enjoy unsealing vintage toys.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's a big part of it as well. Like when you come across sealed vintage, there is that sort of element in the back of your mind, like you're almost like spoiling something, aren't you? Even though they're meant to be open in the first place, there's such a finite amount of those left, aren't there? You almost feel like you are just kind of removing one of the last bits of history. It's
a fact. You are reducing the number of specimens in that preserved condition. Historically, maybe that is significant, and I understand why people have a problem with that, but I certainly justified it to myself, and maybe not so successfully to others, by saying I was on this quest to have the most perfect, loose, perfectly stickers applied collection of sometimes bread and butter G1 toys, because it's actually harder to find loose, perfect stickers applied examples than it is to find sealed examples of some toys. Like you could spend your lifetime trying to look for an Octane that's been opened, doesn't have chromeware, and has perfect stickers. You just will never find that.
That said, there are, and we've talked about it before, but there are G1 toys that you can get sealed and you open them and they're screwed in the box. You know, they're just like they're sealed
My Shockwave,
for
goodness.
35 years and it's, you know, no good.
Yeah. Yep, my Shockwave out of a sealed styro, never touched since 1985. It had collapsing leg syndrome, and the cable, the hose is just cracked, and it's just like every single. It's basically Shockwave bingo. You know, it's the QC bingo. Yep, it's got that problem. Yep, it's got that problem. That's never been handled before. But then my luck with Shockwave, you know.
Yeah, it's just so disappointing. I mean, I told you about it, Mez. I had a G1 Fizzle, which I actually got on sealed card, and purely because I wasn't looking for a sealed one, but purely because there was one I found very cheap, and I thought, you know, those sparkle butts are very, very hard to find loose because of, you know, they're so worn and the little mechanism is bust, or even if it's not broken, you know, it's just been used so many times that it just looks terrible, like they look really battered. So I thought, okay, well, you know, this is worth a punt for the price of it. Anyway, got it off the card, you know, very careful, all of that. First transformation, it broke. Genuinely, the little hood just cracked straight away. And, you know, I was careful with it, and as you would be. But, you know, it was a small thing, it's a cheap thing, but still, I was kind of like, oh, gutted. This toy's been sat sealed on the card for 35 years. I've opened it and then knackered it straight away. So, good job.
It's ruined history. That's what it is.
I know.
And you're sure it wasn't my fault?
I was trying to think of a way to blame you for it. Like I think maybe you just had, I don't know, vibes in the air or something. But
you were just thinking of me at the time, and you've ripped that thing.
Probably, yeah.
Felt a disturbance in the M.A.S.K force. Is that what it was?
quite possibly, yeah.
It's good that you bring that up, actually, Sixo, because I remember selling you one of the Decepticon Spark toys, which I can't remember what they're called.
Yep.
And I sold it to you because it was, even though the card was battered, I couldn't bring myself to open it, so I sold it to you, didn't I?
You did. I've still got it. It's in I love it. I've got all three of them. You know, very good condition. But yeah.
And so I don't have one now, but rather than open it, it was just easier to take that decision out of my own hands. I did the same thing with a box Snapdragon I had, and it still had the bubble, and it was still in the bubble, and it was beautiful, but I couldn't bring myself to have it on the shelf, but not in the box. And I just didn't get enjoyment from it because I wouldn't pick it up and play with it because it's in the box. I didn't want to take it out, and so I sold it rather than have to keep looking at it, because you then start to feel a sense of disappointment about something that you should really love.
That's another thing. The things you buy, the condition you buy them in, almost have more of an influence over you than you thought you could have over the item that you've bought. So the kind of things that we buy for our collection can almost dictate our display. For example, I bought a Target Master Scourge box off Sixo, and it's absolutely gorgeous. All of my G1 boxes are in storage in that fantastic Tetris style that you can't quite get right because not all of them are the same size. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, G1 boxes are the worst for this.
Well, there you go. But that's where they all live, except this Target Master Scourge box, because this box means the world to me.
I should have charged you more for it.
You really should have. You let me get away with that big time. And
I can't even remember what it was, but
it was ridiculously low, mate. It really was. I think Scourge accessories cost more. And that is such a special box that I've forced it into my display cabinet. So it's the only box in there. Actually, I tell a lie. There's another Scourge box in there as well. And why is that in there? Because it has the bubble and the Scourges in it. And it looks so good, I can't bring myself to take it out of it. Yeah, it's a theme that's developed because I had that Scourge, and then the Target Master box arrives. I'm like, yeah, if I've got one of them in there, I should probably have the other one. And then that starts to influence how I display.
Because so you're the one man in the world with the box collection of sweeps, basically.
Liam, you've got him started on it now. This is the rest of the episode now. We're not going anywhere for a little while, I don't think.
Settling.
Right then, moving on. I wanted to talk about the effects of our displaying and storing on other members of our household, the people that we live with. I really felt guilty about all the toy packaging I had in storage and then all the actual toys I had in storage. And it was a very difficult decision at the time that I don't regret in the slightest. I decided to just ditch all of the modern packaging I had And then eventually I cut down all the modern toys I had as well, just because I thought, I can't have an entire toy line in storage. I'm not enjoying it. It's not fulfilling its purpose. And I realized that I was taking up storage space that we could have used for my daughter's things. It was maybe influencing my wife. Maybe she didn't buy as much stuff for herself or for the home that she wanted to, because she knew that there would be a storage dilemma. And she knows how much the toys mean to me as well. So at some point, I just made the decision that I'm going to try and have as little effect on the rest of the people I live with the way I display toys and the way I store them. Does that ever cross your minds?
Yeah, it definitely does here, for sure. I mean, I think that's very pertinent. I think it's easy to kind of take over with a hobby like this a little bit. Do you know what I mean? If you let it anyway, because as we've already sort of said, you know, they're sizable things. They can take up a lot of space, and I think it can just run rampant. You know, if it's kind of left unchecked, you know, this stuff would take over your home and whatever else. So it's definitely a consideration for me, for sure. I think, you know, when you live with other people, you've absolutely got to consider them and, you know, kind of make sure that they've got their space as well. My wife is not someone that kind of necessarily, you know, would complain, you know, but at the same time, like, I'm very conscious of making sure that it doesn't encroach, do you know what I mean? And just kind of taking that consideration, I suppose. So yeah, I can absolutely identify with what you're saying.
Encroach is the word, isn't it? That's such a pertinent word, encroach.
Because you know, even if let's say I did take up more room and she didn't, I don't know, complain about it or whatever, I would still feel that's not a feeling that I want. Do you know what I mean? Of just this stuff being absolutely everywhere and just not feeling good about that. So yeah, I think you have to keep it in check, for sure.
It's good to have the limit, isn't it? That line in the sand as well, because once it does start encroaching, when does it stop? It's always like, oh, just one more or something, isn't it? And it just can keep growing and growing. It's like with me, I just know everything's coming in this room, and so if it doesn't fit in this room, it goes in the other spare room.
Do you feel like you have free reign in? Not free reign. That's it's not about free will or decisions, but does it at all cross your mind that the room you're in with your toys and the things that end up in there, does it need to hold a particular standard versus the rest of your home? For example, I know that every now and then, you know, my wife will come into this room and we'll sit and we'll talk together. You know, she'll chill out in here, and she's often complained that I don't have a pester chair where she can come and sit in here and pester me if I'm spending maybe some time on my computer or just, you know, doing something online. And therefore, I kind of want it to feel like a room in the home, which can be entered and enjoyed and time spent in here, and not have to worry that I've got a ton of stuff on the floor or in display that I'm worried is going to get damaged as a result of time being spent here by someone who isn't me and is aware of everything's weak point or anything like that.
No, not at all. Not for me. This room is...
No.
Yeah. This room here is just... It's not a dumping ground as such. That's the wrong way to put it. It's just where all my stuff goes, you know, because I've got my desk in here, the computer is where all my photography stuff is. So it's basically just where I come in. And so the shelves, like I say, are mostly there for storage and for me to get stuff, but everything is in here. I did once bring a little chair in here for other people, but it was mainly for the dog. That was it. And then once the dog didn't use it, the chair went. So... But other people don't really come in here other than like when they visit we have parties or whatever in the old times. But they mostly just look around in awe, and then I just sort of shuffle them back out.
Time to leave.
Yeah. But like I have so much just stuff just all over the floor because there's nowhere else for it to go, because our house it's not tiny, but it's not big. So there's not that much storage for other stuff, you know, like books or boxes of things. So they tend to just come in here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think I certainly try and keep it tidy. It only really gets a bit messy if it's like photo projects and stuff like that going on, you know, which I know it sounds mad, but I'm sure you both appreciate, you know, if you're kind of doing multiple kind of reviews or whatever, you know, you do take things out of cupboards, etc., put them back. So, you know, there's a bit of tidying up to be done then. But yeah, no, try and keep it tidy. It's not exactly as I want it right now, just because actually I've recently moved rooms. We had a big reshuffle in the house, so this is actually my son's old room that he had since he was born, and then he's now gone to a different room, which is, you know, a bit bigger. because he needs more space himself. So that was quite a process, actually, kind of moving everything, new cupboards, etc.
Can relate.
It was a surprising amount of work. Surprising. I mean, it's kind of scary as well. It does make you evaluate everything that you have.
Moving a collection is the absolute best wake-up call for how much stuff you have.
It's quite frightening, really. I mean, stuff that just sort of compacts away. And, we talk about putting stuff in storage versus in displays, but actually you can have stuff in a display. And not so much that you forget about it, but it's, if it sits at the back of a cupboard or whatever, and you rarely kind of look at it, then you can forget about it quite easily. Let's put it that way. And
it is quite something to realize how many toys fit into a Detolf cabinet.
Yeah.
And when you empty them all out onto one surface, you realize just how much stuff you have.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think right now where I'm at is that I have a bit of downsizing that I probably need to do. And so, I have a small sales pile, let's say. It's not that small, but that I need to crack on with that a little bit. So the aim is absolutely to have it as a bit more of a communal room. So there's room in here for my wife to do yoga and stuff like that. We do have a bit of a desk and a kind of filing cabinet and stuff in here as well. So absolutely, that's kind of the goal. It's just a bit of a work in progress currently.
I wanted to ask something. Have you guys ever had a situation where either because of moving or digging something out of toy storage or just, messing with your collection, you noticed something that you'd put away that you had forgotten you'd owned? And is that always a positive experience where you think, oh, that's so cool, I totally forgotten I had this thing? Or is it something that reminds you that you have maybe gotten to the point where if you've got things that you're no longer aware of, but then they surprise you that you've got them, and you were doing fine without knowing you had it, does it maybe make you think that, well, should I really have it then if it's not on my mind and out of sight, out of mind? Why do I have it in the first place? Do these kind of thoughts ever cross your mind?
Not so much, to be honest. I don't know. I don't tend to forget so much that I have stuff, despite what I said before. I suppose if I sort of sat and thought about it, I would have a good handle on everything that's in the collection. The bits I do forget sometimes are the bits that I haven't yet sold. So you put to one side in a sales pile, and then think, okay, I need to sell that. And then, you come back to it like a couple of weeks or a month later and you're like, oh man, I haven't done it yet. And you kind of, that's the bit sometimes, you kind of think, what have I sold and not sold yet? But no, the actual stuff in the collection, I don't think so. No, I'm able to kind of keep a mental note of it at least.
Yeah, whereas with mine, it's all, I do find that quite a lot where I'll find something in the storage tub and I'm like, oh, I completely forgot I own this. But then it's normally followed up with, I can sell this. Because I don't keep anything that I really like in the storage tubs. It's normally stuff where I've got like doubles of. So a couple of months ago, I found a couple of Thundercats that I completely forgot I'd bought years and years and years ago. And when they were like £1.99 in the Entertainer. So I must have just bought loads. And so they were it's always stuff like that. It's stuff I completely forgot I had. And so it can just go in the sales pile.
Do you think maybe it helps as well? Like, again, I kind of came to this point earlier, but like, the kind of focus of collecting and what have you, because I mean, you mentioned Thundercats, Maz, you've mentioned M.A.S.K and Macross and stuff like that, but I don't have any of that. I've just got Transformers. But even then, I would say that until recently, it has muddied a little bit in recent times, with some kind of Beast era stuff and things like that. But typically, it's a lot of G1 and Masterpiece and third party, and that still at the kind of core of it. There is RID and there is things like that as well, but I don't have stuff like, for example, Vinyl Tech, and I know I don't. So I suppose that helps me to kind of remember what I do and don't have. There aren't as many surprises in that regard.
I think with me, it's like what Liam said. It's if I have an extra, or maybe I bought one to upgrade another one, and then I put the donor one away, or the one that was in not so great condition. But I've tried to keep my collection compact and small enough, manageable enough. Manageable is a big thing for me, to the point where I would know immediately that this is an extra and I'd get on selling it straight away.
Yeah, that does make sense.
But I also think we've circled back to the question of like, if we're having toys in storage and we come across them and think, oh, I found it in storage, forgotten about that, I guess I could sell it. Does that really say something about the toys that ever end up in storage and just the topic of toy storage generally?
I suppose it depends why you've got the storage, though, doesn't it? Like for me, my storage it's mostly empty boxes of, the masterpiece stuff like that, and so other stuff goes into it just because it's there. But nothing that I like is in there, if you know what I mean. Like nothing. The vast majority of my toys are on the shelves. Like all of the different toy lines and stuff, they're all there. So
when you say things you don't like, you're still talking about toys that go into those boxes.
Not like.
Not like cutlery or Tupperware or things like that. Well, Fort Max has got a huge box. I'm just saying.
I like him. Not that I have him. But
well, if you do ever get a Fort Max and you like him enough to put him on display, just think of all the stuff you could put in his box.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, try getting 3 of them on display. That's the thing.
It's a hard life, isn't it? The first
world terrible. It's terrible, mate. Honestly,
Sixo's woes.
Yeah, Sixo's woes. Yeah, no,
that's the thing, though. That is a display decision you've made, and it's a decision that brings you a lot of pleasure, and therefore you make other sacrifices in your collection. You say, well, I won't have these then, or I won't display those, and then maybe you decide they go in storage, or maybe they go on the sales pile. So, you make a decision about what your display is going to look like.
There has to be an element of prioritizing, and I think that's where, having moved rooms, that's why I'm at a kind of bit of a crunch point at the moment and needing to make a few decisions because, actually, for me, it's not so much the kind of regular size stuff or smaller stuff. It is the big things. It is the Fort Maxes. It's the third party combiners and stuff like that. It just they take up. It's the Fans Toys Omega Supreme. They just take up monstrous amounts of room. And do you put stuff like that in a display? That's really difficult because if you are using cabinets of any kind, something like one of those big boys that. I mean, you could probably fit, 30 other toys in the space of one of those or something, depending on what it is and, equivalent space and how many shelves and whatever. But it's a big thing, to just have one of those things in a display, let alone several.
I do feel like I should go back and revise that comment about having nothing I like in tubs because I've just looked around and I realised there's a storage tub just that's absolutely packed full of Centurions and Starcom and Mantiforce and Ninja Turtle stuff, and they're all just kind of squished looking at me, and it's purely because I've got no other space for them.
That's it again, though, isn't it? You're not going to get rid of those just because they're not on display, because you like the idea of having them.
Yeah, they're definitely in there as a temporary measure, because until I can figure out or make space for them to come back out, really.
Do you think maybe that's it sometimes, is that you don't have the answer right now? So it's like, at some point, I might, but so I'll put them in some sort of temporary storage or whatever. I don't want to sell them and I don't want to not have them, but at the same time, I don't have anywhere to put them currently. And it's, I don't know, like what you were saying about Titan's Return and things like that, Maz, was that you sort of realized by having them in display, they were kind of out of sight, out of mind, and that maybe, in your brain, you were like, okay, I don't need these anymore. Whereas there would be surely things that you might have to store in some way for some hypothetical solution or day in the future that you wouldn't want to get rid of. I mean, for example, if it came to it and some of your vintage stuff had to move out, one of those cabinets and you had to store it, would that be a different decision?
I'd sell them, I think.
You think?
I'm having this exact tug of war emotionally with Pretenders right now.
Right.
Because I love those Pretenders. I think they look so good on display. And part of me wants to buy the rest of them that I don't have, because I think I'd really enjoy that. At the same time, I see how much space they take up the way I want to display them. For example, I have 5 Pretenders on display on one Detolf shelf. And the way I like to display them is I've got the shell and I've got the inner robot outside the shell right in front of it, and they both hold an accessory. And I love the way they look that way.
That's exactly how I've got mine on the shelf. Exactly.
Well, yeah, it works for me. And I've even done that with Catilla. So Catilla's shell is there, and then the inner beast is right there as well. The inner beast.
Beast.
In one corner I've got Grimlock, and then Landmine, Wave Rider, and Cloudburst. Can I just say Cloudburst is such a cool name for a toy. And I'd love to get more, but I'd have to display them that way. In fact, Road Grabber is the only other one I have, and he's gone up on top of the display next to M.A.S.K Switchblade. And my brain qualified that because it looks like a M.A.S.K toy. And I was like, yeah, this will totally fit here. and I want more, but I'm not going to buy more, because if I buy more, I'll have no more display space for the things like a G1 Springer. Or
See, this is where we differ, because I'm looking at my Pretenders now, and first things first, they're all in the shells. So that's like step number one. They got to go in the shells. Any combiners, they got to be combined. Make more space. And then the Pretenders are sort of, they're stood in like little military ranks or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it's the same with all of them. But I do that sort of, I suppose, those compromises, not that they're really compromises, but those measures, I suppose, are things that I would do to make space for more.
Yeah, but I do see that as a compromise. I'm compromising how I want to display them in order to have more things on display. So it's a paradox. I am sacrificing my display desires to have more things on display because I want to display more things. So you say measures, but it just sounds like a compromise to me. I don't know what the difference is.
At the end of the day, I think it depends what you prioritize again, doesn't it? Is it having more toys or is it having a nice display? And I think for me, as much as having a nice display is good, I want more toys. I think if I'm being honest with myself and my brain, then that probably comes top for me. So those compromises, fine to call it that. I guess they are.
Is it more of a balance, would you say, rather than a compromise? There's a balance to strike, isn't there?
Yeah, my display isn't perfect. I may be saying these things, but I certainly haven't achieved that display perfection that I'm talking about. I have got every single 1985 and 1984 Autobot car rammed into the same shelf on that Detolf.
But I think that's interesting in itself, because maybe it depends on what you're trying to achieve with your display, which kind of, we did touch on earlier. But for example, there are collectors out there who have some of the craziest displays I think I could imagine. There are people that have just, shelves, billy bookcases, whatever, just filled with toys, of course. And that's probably more normal in a way, but there are people that have like, dioramas, and they have ultra displays and lighting and all kinds of clobber, and it looks amazing. And I'm in awe of that stuff. But genuinely, I kind of, every time I see it, I'm like, where does it go? Either that or you have like 12 toys, and that's, again, that's probably kind of bringing us back to what we're saying, is that you either limit the amount of stuff you have, so that you can display it in a super meaningful and cool way, or you just kind of accept that compromises have to be made, and you just kind of, whether it's just cramming it in, or it's things like only displaying combiners in combine mode and stuff like that, which to me is not a big compromise. Like, I like seeing them in combine mode.
It's the same. I do the same.
Exactly. So that's
it's
not
the only way to really display them, isn't it? Because it feels like the point more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of it's like the culmination of those sets in some ways, isn't it? So
it's their final form.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it really kind of I guess it depends what you're trying to get out of your display as well. What's the purpose of it? And it kind of brings us back, as I was saying, to that initial discussion of like, is it more for practicality because you want to have access to this stuff but not have it look, like terrible on the shelf? Or is it that you just want it, kind of behind glass, looking pretty to never be touched ever again?
Why can't it be both? Why can't it look pretty behind glass, be easy to access, and you touch them regularly and enjoy them, but then when you're not, they go back in the glass and they look pretty?
I'm sure it can. I wasn't saying, okay, well, I guess I was saying, but I didn't necessarily mean that. I guess I was saying that. But I guess I didn't think in my head that it doesn't mean you can never touch them. It's just that, some people prioritize the look of the display much, much, much more, I suppose, is where I'm coming to. And they would have in mind.
The display is the end goal. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you. So, I mean, for example, the people that have multiple modes, they have several toys to have it in every single mode, that kind of stuff. That's really impressive. That's not for me, but it's a big dedication. You see a lot of that with Masterpiece, particularly, I think. You do see some of it with Generation 1, less so because of the nature of collecting G1 and stuff like that. But
it's becoming more prevalent because of one particular collector whose display became quite public. He then influenced a number of other collectors who had got to the point where they had completed G1
Yeah.
So they thought, well, this would be an interesting challenge. And then they started to
do it again.
multiples. Yeah. I have such mixed feelings about this sort of collecting for G1. I love how it looks. And the early catalogs are hugely influential in why people do that. And I know that I tried to do it with a couple of toys I really liked, but I would try to do it just with that toy. But then maybe I'm being hypocritical by saying to people who do it with every single toy, hey, every time you choose to do that with a 6-shot or a quick switch, you're taking 6 to 7 toys off the market, and you're almost a level of hoarding. But that is their choice, you know. It's sometimes with super rare toys, you know, like if you do it with a Diaclone, you think, well, that's actually like 2 people whose collection now can't be finished. But again, you know, they will say that it's a free market. You have the freedom to buy the things that you want, display them how you want, and nobody should really be telling us don't do that. It's not for anyone to look at that collection and say, I'm judging you and you shouldn't do it that way.
Yeah, I think in this hobby, the minute you look at the way other people collect and start judging it in any way, I think that's not a good road to go down. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a
deeply personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Every display is different. Every collection's different. It's all, as you said, Liam, very, very personal. And I don't think you can judge people. You can, disagree with what people do in the sense of you can look at it and think, well, that's not what I would do. But that's not passing judgment in the same way. And I think that multiple collecting for all the different modes, to me it seems a bit mad, but that's just me. I can't imagine doing that. I can see the appeal in a funny kind of way, though. I do like the way it looks in a display. I do definitely, having seen it, I do like the way it looks. I also like the way that people sometimes have like the G1 toy and the Masterpiece toy kind of, of each character. I think that's very cool. Again, I can't imagine doing it because of the space involved, but there are some fantastic displays that look like that. I think they look really, really cool. The bit that you just said about having six shots, that to me is like, I can't.
Well, 7 if you're going to go for a packaged version as well. And a number of people who collect this way will do a packaged version too.
They get in the box.
Yeah, it's got a gorgeous museum quality to it, and I love that there are collections like that you can look at. And I imagine it only really bothers me when I can't find a completely white Jazz for my collection, and I'm thinking, well, that dude's got 3. So I'm sure that's the source of my frustration more than anything.
They're a superior collector.
Everyone's a superior collector to me. I just want lobsters. Which I can't get. You'd never think that B.I.S.K would be a hard to... Anyway, moving on.
Have you got him in all of his different modes?
No.
Not yet.
Don't.
It's 3 steps, Liam. Come on.
One for each step.
I think that you can look at someone's display, though, and admire it and think, wow, that's incredible, but not want it for yourself. You're never ever going to be able to always replicate that or whatever. And, it's a question of resources and whatever as well, isn't there? I mean, for me, buying multiples would mean not having other stuff, of course. So straight away, that's out.
It's a bit of an indulgence, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have 2 vintage G1 hot rods.
And we've both done that with Studio Series hot rod, haven't we?
Exactly. I have this reputation for being so careful with my toys that I made absolutely sure I bought a second one in a box. But I don't want to scuff the leg stickers on my G1 hot rod that I use for photography, because I want that to look perfect as a robot. So I've got one that I can transform back and forth, as well as reissues. But like you said, if you go down the multiple route, it means sacrificing other things. And I have multiple G1 hot rods, vintage ones, but as a result, I don't own other particular G1 toys because of the space this takes up, the finances I've had to sink into having these particular ones. It's always a compromise.
Well, and I guess you have to think that it is all relative as well, because some people listening to this may know, for example, that I have a few MP10s, of different color and variety. And, to some people, that's going to be mad because they're going to look at that and think, well, all right, it's a different color. One's red, one's blue, one's whatever. But ultimately, it's the same, it's the same mold. So it's the same toy. And people definitely do think of that sometimes. I know plenty of people that will buy one of each mold. And I always kind of think, fair enough. I don't know how they necessarily get around the Ironhide and Ratchet thing and stuff like that. I mean, they ultimately just pick the one that they like the most, I think, is the kind of feedback that I've heard a lot of the time. But
do you think
but
that's just to experience the mold, though, more than...
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe that's the appeal of the toy, isn't it? Just experience the mold once rather than the character or a connection to anything like that.
Well, you get character collectors too. People who just want the character, and it doesn't matter what line they come from.
Yeah,
or if they transform.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, literally. Well, that's a big thing. You get a lot of Bumblebee collectors, a lot of Optimus Prime collectors, all kinds of characters, really. Hot Rod probably as well, I would imagine.
Starscream.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that's fun, actually, because I do think, again, I was going to say it's not for me. I suppose I happen to have a number of these, different characters from different generations or whatever. But I do like seeing them together. There is a thing about like a load of Optimuses, kind of Optimi, all kind of lined up. That it is fun to see. I mean, we know someone, obviously, don't we, that has a lot of Optimus Primes in their house, and it is a fun display to see. I think I can see the appeal in it quite a bit, actually. Even though I would feel, I'm kind of missing out because then I want a Prowl or a Starscream or whatever as well. But I suppose for me, I also find it interesting when people are dead set on only one mold, only one version of each mold. And I think that's an interesting choice because sometimes that is for display and stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. I think I broke any chance of me only being a one mold person by having so many Decepticon strike planes as a kid.
Well, that would be it. You would only have, you would have to pick one, and that would be the rule.
Yeah. And that's when the compromise began. Instead of going and buying a Soundwave, I was like, no, I'll just take this same toy in blue because that's where my enjoyment will come from. Maybe because I like the character or whatever, but I realized those compromises and decisions were being made, because as a kid, you can't just buy endlessly. In my case, I was going to the toy store at these particular intervals, and I knew that this was my opportunity to have another Transformer. I knew I was never going to have them all, and I was, very clearly limited by what my parents would buy me. So on that occasion where I got to choose a toy, this exact compromise and this exact decision would come up. Am I going to buy the same thing that I know I like, or shall I get something else? But then I'll miss out on that character. So that was bred into me pretty young, and as far as my toy gathering is concerned.
It's a funny thing how powerful like the character is for that, because like with the G1 Seekers and stuff, even though I knew they were the same mold, I never viewed them as the same mold, if that makes sense. Like Thundercracker and Starscream, I viewed them as separate, different toys, even though they're in different colours of each other, but it's because of the characters in the cartoon and the comics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of people really prioritize the character thing. I mean, I know tons of people, like when MP Starsaber came out, a lot of people were like, well, I don't know the character, so I'm not interested. And you could tell them this is an amazing toy till you're blue in the face, but they would have zero interest purely because they don't know the character, they don't know Victory or whatever. But yeah, it is a weird one. I suppose that's why I mentioned Ironhide and Ratchet, is because to me, they're both, kind of some of the more defined early Autobot characters, so naturally you would want them both, right? But people do make a choice. They do think, okay, I only want one of that mold, whether it's War for Cybertron or whatever, and I will choose one of them or t'other. And I find that interesting. Equally, we know at least one person who their display is made up of only one toy for each character name across generations.
With no repeated molds.
Yeah, no repeated molds. There are rules, aren't there? There are numerous rules for this particular person.
I love that, though.
I think it's an amazing way to do it. It really is.
I've really enjoyed imposing conditions on my own collecting. Because it limits how much I spend, it limits how much space I take up. But I love being able to look at a toy and think, that's not the thing that I want. And, or the feeling is there that I want it, but it doesn't fit into the conditions that I've set, so I'm going to pass. And that's, in a way, that's quite liberating. To give yourself the opportunity to pass and say, not this time, no thanks.
I do know what you mean. There's also a satisfaction to having something that feels kind of cohesive and to kind of meaningful as well. So yeah, I can jam with that. I can appreciate what you're saying. I think it's really interesting. But equally, some people just kind of collect with gay abandon, and they're just they don't worry about this stuff, and they're perfectly happy as well. They're not fussed about toys fitting in a particular display. They're not fussed about what line it is, whatever it is. They just kind of go for it. You know, they like a toy, they buy it. It's that simple.
Yeah, and I really admire how free and fun-based their collecting is. You know, it's not restrained by any self-imposed parameters. I think it works for me, but I like that it doesn't work for others. And, you know, it's always nice to see
a very personal thing, isn't it? Again, it's very personal.
Totally. Yeah.
And unique.
I just think toy displays are the absolute... What's the word for it? It is fundamentally the most personal aspect of this collecting, almost.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think that's what makes it so fun, is because it's so unique to each collector. You know, everybody's different. And equally, this is probably worth mentioning, that it's never not fun to see how other people display their toys as well. You know, like every collector wants to get a look at someone else's collection. You know, there's a reason that threads about collection pics are so popular. You know, and you can post a picture. I know I can post a picture of a shelf or whatever, and people love it. You know, they just love to see that, because it appeals to the collector in all of us, even if it's not kind of fitting, you know, your parameters for how you would collect and how you would display them. It's still admirable to see it, you know. And I guess that's why I like seeing some of the museum stuff. It's why I also like seeing how people just kind of go crazy with it and just, you know, whatever. It's just fun to see.
That's a good segue into the next subject of actual display mechanics and what kind of things do you do to display your toys. For example, I use clear risers. I really love that, you know, on eBay you can get these Perspex risers, and I went to a model shop and they were clearing out all their stock. They had a bunch of risers that were totally clear, lovely size, perfect for a Detolf. In fact, they were displayed in a Detolf, and I took those, and they're just perfect for layering a Detolf shelf, and not necessarily because I can squeeze things under them, but because it just allows the toys which are further back to be elevated that tiny amount. And if I had more risers, I think I would use them on every single shelf, because they're integral to my own display. And people see that and they ask me, where did you buy those? So getting ideas from other people's collections is an awesome thing too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually don't have any risers, and I keep thinking about it as like a possibility, you know, or like shelf splitters or whatever they're called as well, to try and sort of maximize a little bit. I had a thing for a little while where I had RID Brave Maximus and then kind of nothing of equivalent height to stand next to him. So I was like, okay, so how do I get almost like a kind of like a level or something to kind of have two things, you know, one above the other. So yeah, I'm still working on that. But yeah, there is a lot of that can kind of definitely enhance how things look, for sure.
I've got to give a shout out to Dom here, Dom Salvia in the UK. He had this amazing idea of using a Perspex riser and just hooking it onto the Detolf shelf above, so that it sort of created a shelf at the back of the display, and he would line up mini bots on that shelf, and they would just sit on the shelf below, but really, really high up, cleared from anything that was already on the base of that shelf. And I just thought that was a brilliant idea. And if I had more of those types of risers, I could see myself having a shelf of Autobot cars, a nice amount of negative empty space height-wise, because those toys are pretty short, and then just have like a row of mini-bots, so maybe just one or two in car mode, which are perfectly suspended from the shelf above, again, using Perspex, which fits in with the glass shelves. I always thought that was a really cool idea.
So do we not consider Optimus Prime's trailer as a riser then?
That is a subject, and I have that written down as a question. Prime's trailer, store or display?
Display.
Store
for me as well.
Do you display it?
Yeah, it's like one of the best looking things in Transformers, isn't it? It's just it's a beautiful piece to have, and like, even though most of mine isn't for the purpose of display as such, it's something when people see it straight away, their eyes always go straight to it. It's one of the first things that anybody picks up on instantly, and it's just this wonderfully nostalgic thing that is so different to like a wall of robots.
I find that with Prime's trailer, though, if you just put it on a shelf, the front of the trailer, it just sits a bit lower than the rear, and it's only when you swing out those supports that the whole thing is level. And then if I start putting toys on top of it, it's it's like this lopsided display shelf. It's no longer keeping everything level. I just can't sleep that way.
You get the spirit level out. That's not right, this.
I have a tiny spirit level for this exact purpose.
Of course you do.
Blue Tat Optimus Prime's trailer.
Oh my god. I think, as you maybe know, I have a drawer of Prime trailers, because that's just, the kind of craziness that goes on around here. But yeah, I think it's because it's nice to kind of display one of them. I can see that in theory. Like in my display, I do have stuff like Thunder Clash's trailer, and I do have Laser Prime's trailer, stuff like that. But when you get like Masterpiece, for example, when you've got all of the MP10s and all of their trailers, you're not going to put all of those on display.
I have every single one I've got is on display somewhere. So I've got the G1, MP10, Earthrise, and they're all at the back of the shelf of whatever display they're in, and with other toys standing on top of them.
Now thinking about Prime's trailer and how I've utilized that thing in my photography, always standing up, Diaclone style, with the repair bay, it makes me wonder, well, why didn't I just do that? I'm just thinking now why I don't.
What, have it on display as the repair bay?
Yeah, I actually never thought of having my display like that. And I think ever since the new Takara Tomy Diaclone toys went out of my collection, I stopped thinking along those lines of this mechanized bay that would be where I displayed the toys. I mean, that's what I ultimately wanted to do with those Diaclone toys before I realized how wildly out of hand the number of releases were getting and how I would never be able to display it the way I wanted. But yeah, Prime's trailer could easily be displayed standing up. More on that later.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
So I thought we could talk a little bit about our own preferred options for display. I mean, obviously we've talked about how we set the toys out. Do we put them all on one shelf? Do we have them in different modes? What do we do with Prime's trailer? But in terms of the actual physical places that you put your toys, I mean, I have 5 Detolf cabinets. And on top of those cabinets, I have tried to keep things quite sensible. But it is a surface, a cabinet top that I'm using for display. I have a tub, which has a lot of my G1 packaging in it. That's a slide-out tub. It keeps them out of sight and protected. But also there's a surface there, which I use for Lego. And I have one Lego shelf. But what do you guys do with your, what kind of, do you have cabinets?
I don't. I just have normal cheap Argos shelves. So, no cabinets, no fancy over here.
Do you use other surfaces to display toys, or is it just everything is in those shelves?
No. Everything in this room, every surface is covered in toys. Like this desk has just got piles of them because there's nowhere else for them to go. The floor is covered in them. The table I use for my photography, underneath are boxes of toys. And there are storage tubs everywhere because it's all got like photography scenery and stuff like that. There's just boxes of storage and accessories and things like that. There's lots of storage about here.
Yeah, I have cupboards with doors. They are, I'm trying to remember which ones they are now, from IKEA. They are.
Is it a cupboard if it doesn't have a door?
I guess then it's just shelves, but these have doors. So, but these are just standard IKEA shelves, but with doors. That's all. And they look. You can get some nice options actually from IKEA. I mean, IKEA for a lot of collectors, I think, are kind of a go-to, aren't they? I mean, not just the details.
I haven't actually called it IKEA for a couple of years now. Living here, it's now become IKEA.
IKEA.
I think it's become home.
Yeah. I do anything to stay away from that place as I can.
Good meatballs, though, to be fair, but
not here.
No?
Vegan hot dogs.
No, I used to enjoy IKEA meatballs in the UK, but I didn't enjoy them here.
It's kind of disappointing.
Anyway, like IKEA.
Well, certainly going to IKEA is not anybody's idea of fun, is it? Really, but some of the products and stuff.
Organised hell.
All right.
That's what it is.
Yeah. But certainly the actual standard cabinets and stuff that they have, I think anyway, look really, really good. I mean, certainly when I got these ones that I've got now and posted a few pics online, they got a really positive response. A lot of people saying, where'd you get them? I do think that the doors elevates them slightly. That's just my personal preference. And of course, it does help with dusting and stuff like that, and kind of keeping them the content slightly protected. And then I've got another the kind of top shelf as well, with an extra set of doors, so it just kind of gives you that bit more space. which is really, really good. And I find that you can fit quite a lot in there, actually. So yeah, they work for me exceptionally well.
How do you dust your toys, and how often do you dust them?
I very rarely do, to be completely honest. Because of the doors, it honestly never needs it. I mean, sometimes, I mean, you guys know as well, for photography, dust is a not, well, I was going to say a bad word there, but you know what I mean. It's terrible because it just shows up, in any kind of
and people want to
DSLR
tell you
photography.
that they can see it.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Dust is the bad word.
Yeah, dust is the bad word. Dust is a 4-letter word. But yeah, but it shows up automatically in DSLR photography, and it's super annoying. But actually, with the doors, it's not such a big problem, to be honest. I do notice it more if, and you can see the difference. Like if I do have a particular toy that has been left out for however long, I can totally see that it's more dusty than the ones in the cabinet, for example. So I think doors are great in that respect.
I was told that even with Detolf cabinets that I have, dust will still make its way in. And while it's a much slower procedure, it is very obvious to me when I moved the cabinets between rooms that amounts of dust had gathered. And when I came to dust them, once upon a time, I would dust the toys on top of the cabinet because obviously they would get dusty really fast. I would use compressed air canisters, which obviously is very effective for blowing the dust away. But there's an environmental issue there, and I am now firmly of the belief, because it says so on the canister, that it can have a reactive effect on plastic. And I reckon that one of my Valkyries on my shelf had no right to discolor because the guys around it haven't. But that's the one that I had used the compressed air gas on. So I think I actually accelerated the yellowing on that toy by using compressed air. So what I use for dusting now is a really sensitive makeup brush, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's perfect, and I used it on every single toy when I moved between rooms, and I just sort of adopted that as a part of my collection maintenance.
Sounds really good. You sound made up about it.
Liam, you speak now.
Well, Maz brushed that one off really well, didn't he?
I despair. Liam, do you dust your toys?
People are turning off
now. No, I try to, but as I said before, most of mine, so they're crammed together, like they're in the terraces at like Chelsea away or something. They're all like crammed in, and it's just hard, because you have to sort of keep moving them, and it's like, how do I get them back in there? So a lot of the time, I just kind of leave them and just hope.
The dust is part of the display.
Yeah, it adds a vintage quality, doesn't it?
And what do you guys do about protecting your collections from UV light, from yellowing, from sunlight? Is it just positioning?
Yeah, partly. At the moment, because we've just moved rooms and everything, I need to get some filters for the window. You can get the old, what are they called? The kind of UV filtering thing, the kind of the seal to go over the glass. Mm-hmm. And that'll help immensely. At the moment, it's more a question of just keeping the blind down whilst I'm sorting that out, so that there's no direct sunlight on it or whatever. But yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, so like here, I have the curtains closed all the time, but the real problem is heat, isn't it? Because that also triggers the yellowing. So in here, I've turned off the radiator because we've got so much insulation. The house is actually quite warm, even in the winter once the heating's on. So if I don't have the radiator here, it keeps the room a bit cooler, but
I think it's temperature variance. I think it's wild differing temperatures over a period of time that can also have the effect as well. And sometimes there's a worry of toys being stored and shipped, over long distances, over long periods of time, that can trigger it. And it's not something that you'd see immediately either. It's just, it will happen over time.
Yeah, because some of the toys I got in some of those halls, they've never been out of a cupboard in 30 years. And they've gone really yellow, like in certain size and stuff. And it's just because they've been in a really warm house. And you see it a lot with vintage, like game consoles and stuff, where you'll find stuff that's never been out of the box, but it's yellowed inside the box because of just of heat.
Yeah. It depends where it's stored. I know there's another collector that we know that has had this problem in their living room. And, a few of their toys, this is the Optimus Prime collection, a few of their toys have yellowed because it was near to a little heater. I think it was a gas heater or whatever it was. And they swear blind. And it is, you can see that the ones on the end of the shelf nearest to where the heater is are the yellowed ones. And so it's happened over a number of years, whatever, to the point where a couple of them are quite bad, actually, I think. It definitely does affect it. I think keeping them in tubs, actually, as well, someone told me, in plastic tubs accelerates it.
Plastic baggies as well for accessories and things like that. Try not to have the toys in contact with plastic when they're being stored or anything like that. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, because some people use specialist paper, don't they? There's certain types of paper people wrap stuff in to avoid them touching.
I can believe that, and sometimes people only handle their toys with special gloves as well. That's a thing.
It's quite extreme. I think that all of this, though, really depresses me because I hate the idea that you can get, like an immaculate collection, not Madonna, I'm not talking about her, but the like an immaculate collection of toys, and have them all lined up really, really nice, and it just yellows. There's nothing. Obviously, there are steps you can take to prevent that and diminish it or whatever, but it's all finite, really. Do you know what I mean? That a lot of this stuff, it doesn't last forever.
Yellowing has become like the real downside of the hobby to me, and it's not even where my toys have yellowed. It's where sometimes you're not sure, like the Armada Jetfire, every time I look at it, because it's slightly off-white, and I can never tell if it's yellowed or not. And I don't think it has. When I look at pictures comparing it, it's like, oh no, it looks fine. And like it was when I got it, but it plays tricks on you after a while, doesn't it? You just start noticing slight off-white looks a bit,
It's hideous. It's hideous looking for toys that may potentially be yellowed as well, but that's a whole other topic. But it kills me, honestly. It's the one thing. If I could eliminate one thing from the hobby, it would be discoloration on toys, for sure.
And of course, with you guys doing your photography, and all of us, we use proper photographic lights and environments. It just shows up so savagely under those lights as well.
Yeah,
it breaks my heart with toys like Jetfire. It really breaks my heart when I look at my Jetfire yellow, and it's so sad.
I had an unused Matsushiro Jetfire boxed a few years ago, and it was the most crystal white thing I owned, and I sold it before it ever had a chance to get yellow in my hands. I just thought, I've enjoyed it for a while, but I actually felt stress at how I was storing it, because I had to keep it stored in darkness. I had it surrounded with small silica gel packs. In fact, I have silica gel packs on every shelf of every part of my display to absorb moisture.
Because it's so sad, isn't it, that you kind of have to resort to those, and it puts you through those stresses, and it feels like such a first world problem, but it is a real stress when you look at when you have big collections like this. It is a really real sort of worry, isn't it?
Yeah. Plus, if it's something you really love, it's going to break your heart when it goes.
Yeah, and so much of this is finding like the perfect version of something you love, isn't it? Like, say, a G1 Jazz, and you get it and it's beautiful and you have that, and then there's this idea that it could just suddenly turn when you've done nothing, absolutely nothing to justify it.
Yeah. Well, I try to control it as much as possible. I mean, living in Iceland, virtually every building and home here is heated 100% of the time. We have geothermal heating, so it's a lot cheaper here. And because of the climate, generally, heating is on all the time, everywhere. So at least I know that by keeping the temperature at something, smart, there's no temperature variance. And because the heating is always on, I try to remove the temperature variance issue. And I've got the silica gel packs to remove moisture, and I've got a blackout blind, and the curtains are always closed in here. So I just do whatever I can. And obviously now I don't use a gas cylinder to dust things. And I try not to store things in plastic baggies or Ziploc bags and things like that. But again, that's only so much you can control. This is a chemical reaction at the end of the day. It could be batch related. It could be you don't know what history your toy has had before you owned it with vintage. Maybe it already had started the process before you ever got it into your collection and started protecting it.
And it's such a weird thing to, when you talk to other people about it, people who don't collect toys, and you step back a little bit and you go, and they come in your room and you're like, I'm keeping it at a certain temperature, I'm keeping these blackout blinds up, and I'm worried about this yellowing, and they're sort of looking at you like, they're toys. But to us, it's a completely different sort of view on it, isn't it? Very different perspective.
Yeah, it's a real killer. As I say, I can't stand it. It does cause stress, for sure. It definitely does. I think some toys are obviously more notorious for it, for yellowing than others. And some toys have surprised me. Do you know what I mean? I think I mentioned in a previous episode that Masterpiece Star Saber, I'm pretty convinced mine has started to turn. And that disappoints me, because it's not one that you would worry about necessarily.
No.
But there you go. Could be any of them.
Will you replace that toy then?
I don't know. I don't know, tough one. I'm live with it for now. It's a problem for another day.
What about if it was a vintage Star Saber? Would you replace that?
That's a good question. Fortunately, my vintage Star Saber is minty white, touch wood, along May it stay. That would be one, if that was to turn, I would be gutted, absolutely gutted, just because of how nice it was and still is, in my care. So, yes, that would be a difficult one. Would I replace it? You'd need to ask me at the time. I don't know. Tough one. I do like having it. I guess the only thing I'm thinking right now is if it did go and it was bad, then the idea of finding another one that's like minty white and then having that go bad as well, that would be...
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, the chain. Do you perpetuate the chain, or do you just say, this is the one in my collection and that's the way it looks? And that's all there is to it. But then, because we do so much photography, there's that element of, but I want the photography to look a certain way. And you know how it is when you post a photo, people notice the smallest things. And
there are definitely, but equally there are toys that when you photograph them, the yellowing shows up more. There are definitely toys that I've not noticed as discolored, but when you get them in front of the lights, which, as you say, show everything up. And
Slug Slinger.
It's sometimes it's just a slight difference, isn't it? It's just a slight sort of shade of discoloration or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. So it can be a real surprise sometimes.
And sometimes it doesn't show up until you put it next to another one, and then you realise it looks fine to your eyes. True.
I mean, equally, there are some toys that maybe discolour and it's fine. And I say that lightly, but, there are definitely toys that, like if they're blue or whatever, and maybe they go like a slight, different shade, they still look fine, and it's not the end of the world.
Diaclone Blue Streak is a perfect example of that. 90% of them have discoloured blue plastic where it's gone a slight tinge of green. And, I think some people just believe that's the way the natural colour of the toy is, but it isn't. But so many of them have gone that way. I mean, that's certainly not... I know mine is a little gone that way, but it's just not something I will replace as a result. But you must remember that if it's discoloured, the plastic can be weaker and more brittle and something to be aware of. So even though you don't mind it visually, you've got to think about structurally it's affected.
And it's reversible, but only for a certain amount of time, isn't it? It only lasts for so long.
Yeah, the reversing, yes. You can reverse it. There are products you can get. But yes, I believe that ultimately it will go back. It's not. This
happened to me on my on Countdown on the Rocket. On one side, it had gone a little bit yellow, so I did the trick, and it lasted about a year, and then the yellowing came back.
What, in exactly the same spot?
Yeah, exactly the same place. So it just
I was led to understand that was the case, which is unfortunate. It's a shame, isn't it? Because you often hear that solution, the old peroxide thing, for de-yellowing, but temporary.
It's like trying to live forever. You can't reverse aging. You can't live forever.
It's a really easy process to actually do because it's not expensive either. But like you say, some things last longer than others, and is it worth it, or is it just worth going to find another version of the toy?
I just love it because it contains two steps that are absolute no-nos if you want a toy not to yellow. One of them is putting them in the sun, and the other one is putting it in a plastic, in a Ziploc bag. And those two steps are required for the peroxide process, but normally those are two things that you would absolutely avoid.
Yeah, it's quite counterintuitive.
Right.
It is super weird though when you do it the first time, and when you see the results, and you're just like, wow, how has this happened? And then a year later, you're like, oh.
There was something I saw online actually the other day that was supposedly like some chemical or something you could buy that was supposed to be like magic for action figures or whatever.
The fake one, wasn't it? Yeah.
I don't know if it's fake or not. I literally someone posted a link to an advert for it, and I didn't have a chance to kind of really look into it or whatever. But it seemed too good to be true. Let's put it that way. It's the kind of thing where, like, if it worked, you kind of feel like more people would be talking about it.
I still find it strange today though that we still have that on toys, the yellowing as well. It's like it feels like something they should have worked out how to kind of stop by now.
Yeah,
especially when new toys yellow at a faster pace than vintage toys in some cases.
Yeah. Do you think of any in particular?
Well, I'm really surprised at those reissue Macross Valkyries because they turn up as yellowed as the vintage do. And also reissue G1 Ultra Magnus that we spoke about a couple of episodes ago is another example of that. I want to talk about accessories. How do you guys display accessories that are not immediately used on the toys when they're in your displays? Or how do you store them, not display them, I guess?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's more a question of storing them here. I mean, it's some accessories, I guess it depends what it is. It's a bit like trailers and stuff like that, isn't it? You know, as I say, some stuff like Thunder Clash's trailer for me would go in a display. Is that an accessory or is that part of the toy? I don't really, you know, however you quantify it, but that for me is like display worthy. Most accessories I have in little bags and they go in a drawer. And I find that works quite well for me. I kind of try and organize them by, sort of categories. So like masterpiece stuff, and then I will separate out the bags, you know. So for example, there's a bag of actual official Takara masterpiece stuff. And then in there for some stuff is in one big bag. Like Carbots, for example, I'll just keep a bag of all the guns and things like that. But then if it's like Ironhide and it's got like a bazillion accessories, I'll just have a little bag inside the big one for just his accessories to try and keep it relatively organized. And a lot of that, again, is photography because you want to have the stuff, you know, if you want to suddenly do a photo with MP Ironhide and, you know, you need access to one of his particular guns, you don't want to be rooting around in boxes and whatever for it for ages. You just want to have a system, you know, where you can kind of get to it. So I think it probably depends. It's a very specific thing for me. I know lots of people just keep them in the boxes sometimes, you know, in the actual toy boxes themselves, you know, if they're not that fussed about the accessories. For me, I need a system where I can kind of get to the stuff so that I can then include it in a photo if I want to. So that works for me.
Yeah, for me, it depends how intrinsic they are to the toy. So if it's something like a trailer, it's on display with the toy, any kind of accessory like that. But where it's like little extra guns or weapons, like the Titans Return figures came with a lot of random sort of guns that the little figures could sit in and stuff like that. They don't stay on display. They just go in a drawer in little bags. Not quite the nesting Russian doll style bags like Sixo does there. Just little bags chucked in a drawer. That's about it. But
I think it's interesting though, because like G1 actually you suddenly realize has relatively few accessories that can't be stored or displayed on the toy itself. Like there's not that many, if I look at the kind of size of piles of accessories, G1 is the smallest by far because most of it can be, equipped on the actual robots in robot mode. Whereas Masterpiece, by comparison, is ridiculous. There's so much stuff.
Yeah.
And some of it, I think when you get a lot of it, some of those accessories are fun to start with, but then I can understand why equally people roll their eyes a bit sometimes as well, because there is a lot that you might use once and then goes into storage or whatever. So that is definitely...
Yeah, I was actually thinking that with the Masterpiece stuff the other day when I was boxing up Masterpiece Hound, and I opened the box and there was a load of stuff and it's like, I forgot it was all in there. I just took out the toy, the gun, the little Spike figure, and that's about it. And the rest of it, you're like, oh yeah, there's all this sort of unnecessary stuff. Because you get so many accessories now, don't you, that are good for photography, but not, for the most part, it's just another thing to leave in the box, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, I do like them, definitely. But there are accessories that I've used once, maybe twice, and then never more. And it's that stuff does take up a lot of space as well. So I can understand why people get sometimes a little bit narked about the price being jacked up or whatever. How people kind of feel about it on MP toys for accessories that they're not going to use particularly. And again, we use them for photography. Not everybody's going to do that. So a lot of people, like you say, just will leave them in the box or whatever.
It was good that you mentioned G1 because you're talking about the Dinobots and the little rocket launchers. And they're accessories that, no matter how hard I try, I can't find a way to display them with the Dinobots because they just don't have enough hands. They've got swords, guns, and a missile.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that exact thing about
2 guns and a sword.
Yeah.
Well, how many accessories do you lump onto a figure and affect the way it actually looks versus how you want it to look, just so that you don't have to store a few more accessories? And it leads me to this hilarious story that the Space Bridge told me about Prime Fists and the gun that comes with Optimus Prime. And because he found that it was always the left fist that was missing from Optimus Primes. But they would have the right fist and the gun. And that's because people would typically put the gun in the right hand, and therefore it was a bit easier to keep track of, that stayed with the toy in some capacity, or maybe it would always stay in the fist, but the left fist would always be missing. It just made me think of like, do we mostly put the gun in the right hand for our robots, and how that would affect what accessories would be difficult to find 30 years later.
I'm sure 9 times out of 10 it's the right hand. Yeah. Or maybe it depends. I'm not a lefty, so I can't speak on behalf of lefties, but maybe they do it the other way. I don't know.
Transformers 90s style. The Beast Wars is coming up next on Tsunami. To your stations, quickly.
I feel that there are two topics, or two specific things when it comes to toy display and toy storage that are quite current. Now, around about a month ago, there was a tweet doing the rounds where someone said in the middle of the night, thousands of pounds or dollars worth of robots cried out in pain and then were silent. And he tweeted a picture of this collapsed display room, which had just imploded. And these the plastic display stands that he used, you use the tubes to sort of, it's modular and you just keep building it and higher as it goes, had all just collapsed. And there was just piles and piles of Transformers, expensive masterpiece, third-party generations, all sorts, just in this really very sad pile in the middle of the room. And obviously, the internet, being the expert on all things, told him what he was doing wrong with his display, using those slightly unreliable and kind of wobbly plastic shelves. But did you guys see that tweet?
Very much so. Yes, I think everybody saw that tweet. It's just one of those that does the rounds, isn't it, as you say?
I remember that kind of tubing and shelving is used by people who display at TF Nation, and it's supposed to be temporary. And when I've helped dealers and we've been putting things on those shelves, I always worry because there was so much give in those things, and there was so much movement laterally with those. I was just like, it's a good thing this is only being used temporarily and we're right here the whole time.
Well, I guess they're good for conventions, aren't they? Because it's kind of quick and easy to put up, or exactly. And transport and light and all of that. But yeah, they're not meant for permanent displays for sure. But I don't want to sound like I'm throwing shade or whatever at anybody's display options, but just purely from a recommendation point of view, as you said, it's just not designed to kind of hold, lots of stuff over that long time. So
yeah, and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Where does some of the tallest, biggest robots end up in displays? Sometimes at the top, because there's the most clearance between the roof, the ceiling, and the display, and they're the ones that take the biggest dives.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is, you've got to be careful with that stuff, because the last thing you want is absolutely everything collapsing. It is kind of heartbreaking to see that. I mean, that tweet, I think part of the reason it captured so much attention was that just a lot of people, I'm sure, can kind of imagine what that must be like, the absolute horror of just walking in. I mean, I can't even imagine. I do remember actually a couple of years ago, I think I heard a crash when my collection used to be downstairs. I heard a crash downstairs, and a mirror, it turned out to be anyway, a mirror had fallen off the bathroom wall downstairs, down there. I was alone in the house at the time, and the cord had just snapped or whatever, and it was an almighty mess. But my first thought was, oh my God, it's something with the collection or whatever, that something had come off the wall or whatever. And it was just like, it would have been a disaster. And as I was kind of running down the stairs to see it, it was like this, what am I going to find? And in a way, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of relieved it was just the mirror, obviously. But I can kind of imagine what it must be like, and not very nice.
No, I think when the last apartment we were living in the middle of the night, the shower cubicle shattered, just randomly shattered. The amount of trouble that we went to clean that up, I almost wish it was my collection instead of the shower cubicle.
Oh wow.
But yeah, I mean, I've obviously heard stories of Detolf cabinets, just the glass absolutely shattering on those. I mean, do you remember there was a UK collector who just randomly one day, one of their Detolf cabinets, the door just absolutely shattered. Probably maybe something to do with the tension in the screws and everything.
I was going to say, yeah. Yeah, that was really. Well. I do remember that. That was pretty horrific as well, because it shatters into tiny little pieces, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's made to though. It's made to go into those small pieces, isn't it, for safety?
Yeah, still pretty pretty terrifying, I should imagine.
I do have a lot of worry about things falling off shelves. Sort of like like the M.A.S.K cars and Jurassic Park stuff because they're quite big for the shelves and they've got really big wheels, so you always have to sort of position them at an angle where they're not going to roll off. But then that takes up more space, so a lot of time they are facing forward. And I think sometimes when I walk in the room, I'm like, is this room shaking enough for them to all start piling off?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had some worries recently with the thousands of earthquakes we were having here. I was always concerned about, and you absolutely have to secure your cabinets to the wall. I mean, it's just a must do. If you have kids as well, it's just, or pets even, it's a must do. And I have to get around to that, especially living in a country which is so seismically active. I think the only
feel called
thing
out now. Mine aren't.
No, neither are mine, and they really should be. Like everything in my daughter's room is secured to a wall, but in my room it's not yet. And I've just got to get those brackets out and do it. And I'm just thinking, well, what if I get a sixth cabinet and everything moves along a little bit more? I'll just have to do it again. But it's something that has to be done.
It's one of those to do right at the start, isn't it? When you put the cabinets in, otherwise you forget about it and whatever else. But it's definitely a must do for sure. Because it's just a big risk otherwise, particularly if you've got loads of earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we absolutely must mention when it comes to displays, and we kind of mentioned it at the start of the episode, is the new Haslab Unicron. Do you guys have any idea how you're going to display yours? Liam, you're not getting one, are you?
No, he's too big.
Well, I decided for that reason as well. It's too big. For me, it was too expensive. And I must admit to a degree of envy now looking at the pictures of people's Unicrons arriving. But Sixo, how are you going to display yours?
Absolutely no idea. Got to be frank about it. And, I'm sure there are people that hear that and they're like, that's madness, to kind of, I suppose, invite this thing into your house and not know what you're going to do with it. But hey-ho, I figure I'll work it out. I guess for me, it was just, it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime things, that just won't come around again in a hurry. I mean, I'm sure eventually there'll be something bigger, something better, whatever. But it's Unicron, it's just so legendary, really, in this fandom. And for me, I just couldn't imagine not getting the chance to kind of have a go with it and just to see what it's all about. And will it be with me forever? I honestly don't know. I mean, I suppose the reality is that, if anybody does decide that they do want to move it on, it's got good resale value already. We're kind of seeing that. So
it's already tripled in price, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's mad. It's mad. And, I think a lot of people assumed that there was going to be another, like a wider retail release. And that's kind of looking like maybe that won't happen now. Although they kind of alluded to it in the video, didn't they? And kind of said, well, we really feel like the initial release, at least, that they wouldn't do that again because they wanted to keep it special for the people that funded it, crowdfunded it, whatever.
For the backers, absolutely,
that backed it. Whether they'll do it in another deco or something, I don't know, maybe. But for me, I am nervous about the whole kind of space thing, but I'm also not, because I'm thinking it's just going to be fun to kind of experience it. So I kind of have a vague sort of place in mind for it, but I would like to see it in planet mode and see how that kind of works, and if it'll look good there. So we'll have to see how it goes.
See, for me, I think I'm more envious of the space people have to have it than having the toy itself, because like even with the Titan class figures, they don't fit on my shelf. So at the minute, they're all just covering the floor. And like some of my favorite toys are like Boulder Hill and the Starcom command base. But I know I said earlier, none of the toys in storage are toys I like, but like I'm like the brown Pinocchio right now, because it turns out that like Boulder Hill and stuff like that are all in storage because they are just too big to have on display anywhere. And there's no way to do it. So I'm always envious of how people find room for toys like that.
Yeah, it's a real thing, actually. It's a real problem. This is something I really struggle with. And again, things like third-party combiners are the worst for it as well. Yeah. I mean, once you get into that 3PMP world, and you want to have a Devastator, a Bruticus, a Superion, they just take up so much space. I know we kind of talked about
Fans Toys Fortress Maximus.
Well, that is, that's a good point. If that actually happens, which I don't know, part of me still isn't entirely convinced it will. Like I maybe it will, I don't know, but I think it's still so crazy. It's such a crazy prospect. We'll have to see.
That's a toy you have to get a school place for, isn't it? Because it's so big.
Yeah. Where on earth is that going to go in anybody's home? There's no amount of reshuffling your display that can make room for that thing. The size that they're talking about it being. Have you seen pictures of it, Maz?
I haven't seen it at all. No, but
It's
I'm intrigued now.
So, well, you've got to, you'll have to look it up after this. And if people are listening to this going, "What? Fans Toys Fortress Maximus?" Just look it up, honestly, because it's ridiculous. It's so big. I mean, there's a picture of it next to. I think actually I worked it out and put together a little picture of what it would look like next to something like their Fans Toys Hot Rod, and it's human size, genuinely. It's way, way, way bigger than Unicron could ever hope to be.
It is massive. It could ride a Shetland pony. It's that kind of size, isn't it? It's like a small child.
Yeah, Maz is looking it up. You see what I mean? It's, is that ever going to come to fruition? I don't know. All we've seen is those kind of renders.
Come off it. It's like that Metroplex that dude built in his house. You know, the thing that could house his books and his TV and everything else.
Yeah, and they're proposing to sell it at retail.
Too far, though? Do you think it is like it's going to be too big for people to store, isn't it? For most people. I mean, I know it's aiming at a very niche market anyway, but
yeah, I think a lot of people would be out on that one. I think a lot of people would, even Unicron backers would surely have nervousness about Fort Max because it is so large. And as I say, it's person size. I don't know where you would put it. I really don't.
And it's only a few years ago when people would like complaining about the size of sort of the third-party Omega Supremes, weren't they? Everyone was like, they're very big. Where am I going to put them? And now we just seem to keep scaling up again, don't we?
Yeah, well, that was Fans Toys again that kind of started that. And I remember when they did that Omega, when they first unveiled it, it was really like, oh my God, are they crazy? What are they doing? They're going to do
2 boxes.
Omega.
They had to ship it in 2 boxes.
Yeah, right. Like, they're going to do Omega Supreme. Like, this is going to be, redonkulous. And then, look, a few years later, here we are. Oh, no, they're going to do Fortress Maximus, and it's going to be like 4 times the size of the Omega Supreme that they did, or whatever it is. I don't know. But it's, it looks to be like that big, right?
Can I just say, Googling Fans Toys Fortress Maximus brought up a copious amount of Sixo photographs. Research.
I may have tweeted about it a few times.
One thing, though, this Unicron, you mentioned a couple of episodes ago that this was a watershed moment for most collectors.
Yes.
That they, either in space terms or in finance terms. And it's an official toy, and it qualifies as Grail status because of a number of very key, significant things to do with this character, which makes sense. It's okay. Maybe it's a one-off. It's a total standalone. It's an event release. It's a thing of its time, and everyone's going to remember where they were when Haslab Unicron came out and they dropped the money. But this thing, imagine the next project from Haslab is Cybertron. The planet Cybertron, non-transforming, massive Cybertron that you can have your Unicron clawing into, with a display stand next to it. That is a supremely iconic scene from the beloved Transformers movie. Who's going to be able to resist that? Based on the fact that they've opened the floodgates now.
Yeah, actually, I did an article when Unicron was first unveiled that was kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek. It was like all the reasons why you shouldn't buy Unicron, but they were really, this is the twist, they were reasons that you should. Cheeky me. But one of them was talking about, what happens if they then go on to do a Primus, or a Cybertron or whatever. What are you going to do? Because at that point, you're kind of in for a penny, in for a pound in a certain respect, aren't you? As you say, just imagine like you get Unicron, it's all good, you've just made the room for it, all of that. And then they do a Cybertron or a Primus and you think, okay, that's too much for me now. And then actually seeing people in hand with this thing, posting their pictures and whatever else, it would be a bit crushing, certainly.
Especially as if they do a Cybertron and it doesn't transform, and it doesn't need that level of engineering, it could conceivably be much more affordable than Unicron,
that's
but
true.
Much more sizable. So you'd have the space concern and the display concern. It'd be like, well, it's like an accessory, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it would have to be pretty big, pretty big. I don't think they will. I think that would be...
Maybe they'll do just like a hemisphere. Just a part of it, just so you can recreate the claw scene, but not the whole planet.
That would be cool. I think when you do this and, you do reviewing and all of that, you're kind of, in some ways, you're already knee deep into this stuff, but there are people I'm sure, that maybe they've only got, a very small collection already, and then this opportunity presents itself to own Unicron, and whether they loved Transformers as a kid in the 80s or since then or whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is that for a lot of people, it might be okay, how deep into this do I want to get now? If I've got, like, my collection, for example, is like a handful of War for Cybertron figures, and now they've announced Unicron. Ooh, like, where do I sit on that? And it could be a real gateway drug for a lot of people into, kind of more serious collecting, I think. So, I'm sure there will be people that probably this might be the start of their display in some ways.
Do we think that it's actually going to end up being one of those that lives in storage more than... I mean, people are going to keep the box, obviously. Maybe some people will get rid of it, but then if there's a moment in your life where you can't display this thing anymore, where's it going to go?
Maybe. I think the box is an interesting one by itself, because actually the box is huge. I mean, it's like the size of a dishwasher box. And where do you store that? So it's one thing storing the toy, but then if you've got the toy and the box, that's a consideration.
And that's not the kind of box you're going to bin, is it, either?
You can't flatten it. Well, you can flatten the outer box, but then you've got the styro, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, that's a whole thing. In some ways, I'm, and I know I'm not the only one, I'm sort of almost more nervous about the box, because I'm like, it's going to take up a lot of room in the old garage, So, yeah, it's a ridiculous hobby, really, isn't it? And this is just the pinnacle of all of it, let's be fair.
Hey, don't flip out. Transformers Generation 2 will be right back.
Okay, I want to do one quick fire question to finish up the episode. I want to ask you, if there's one thing you could change about your collection display, what would it be?
I think, to be honest, it would just be to get shelving units that have got sort of, covers on the front, because I am quite tired of the amount of dust they pick up, and like, even though I don't dust them that often, it's such a chore when I have to. Anything that would make that a lot easier. I think that'd be my primary consideration, rather than it just being on a display sort of to look great, because I'm mostly the only person who comes in here. So for me, it's mostly just save myself a lot of work. And again, getting bigger shelves to get more stuff in as it's spreading out.
Yeah, I think that would probably be it for me, to be fair. Is maybe just to have a bit more room to have everything to breathe, just a little bit, instead of sort of feeling like it is slightly kind of like hemmed in. So yeah, that's probably it for me. But I'm sure you could ask a lot of people. I'm sure they'd say the same. More room. Ultimately, it's a struggle for all collectors, isn't it? But I do think there's an element of your space is almost never enough. So whether you have 10 toys or you have 100. You're always kind of grappling with the space element to some extent, because you keep kind of evolving the space that you have in your house for this stuff. I mean, I remember back when I had a very small collection, and genuinely would fit onto like one shelf, and still I don't think at the time I was like, oh, there's not enough room for this. I'll have to clear some books away, kind of make a bit more room every time like a new one would turn up. So it's just. There's never enough space, but it kind of keeps growing, if that makes sense. It's a weird kind of dichotomy. I can't really explain it.
There is a sense of the space you have does sort of dictate how your collection sort of builds, doesn't it? And how it develops to some extent. Because I've noticed lately I've started going backwards with stuff. I've started selling stuff to try and fit more of it on the shelves, rather than it all being all over the floor, and just to try and breathe a bit more in the room.
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing I would change... other than more space.
Shock
maybe
absorbers.
Instead of... Say that again?
Shock absorbers for your little earthquakes.
Wow. Right, suspension. I think other than having maybe another Dettol 4.2, was maybe to go with one large glass cabinet. I really love how they look. People who display them in much wider glass cabinets. But also I think I would be even stricter with the things that I'd bought, because I own things now that I can't bring myself to sell. And I display them as well as I can. But I feel like if I had made slightly stricter decisions about what I'd buy, I'd have less issue with space and display now. Guilt for owning too many of some things, and unable to own certain things that I want maybe, but I know I don't have space for. Like I'd love to have more Ultimate Collectors, Star Wars ships. I'm not actually a massive Star Wars fan, but I love the Lego for those ships, and I'd like to have, a Star Destroyer, but I know that it's absolutely impossible for me to display that in my room or in the home. And actually, you know what, Sixo, you were just saying about when you had one shelf. I still have a photo of when my entire collection in late 2003 was a reissue Tiger Track and a reissue White Astro Train. That was my entire collection. And I had them displayed on the same shelf with their collector's card, and it just felt amazing. I loved how that looked. It was so clean and so much the focus.
There is something about a small display, a kind of focused but very kind of small display. It does look good.
And I think one other thing I would change is I would find a way of displaying my childhood Transformers, because I have them all. The only one that lives in my display now is Target Master Scourge. And that's actually just the Fracas. The
Target Master Scourge? You've not mentioned him at all.
Oh, this is the first time we're hearing this.
Yeah. But do you have the boxes as well, maybe? Yeah.
One box, no bubble. But have we talked about Pink Hot Rod this week?
We haven't, but we should.
Yeah. I'd find a way of displaying a Pink Hot Rod.
I would.
I'd make display space for that.
It would need a shelf of its own, I think.
Yeah. I'd like a bisque shelf as well.
Of course you would.
Here's a question, Maz. If you could get a Pink Hot Rod, would you buy a second one to do it up with the stickers like we saw on the advert?
Oh, yeah, the UK advert with... What did it have? It had Starscream, Skywarp, and Trax stickers on it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I never thought of it. Now you've put the idea in my head. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to rest until I've done something precisely like that, even with a standard G1 Hot Rod.
it was the more I watched the advert last night, I was like, I talked myself into it. I was like, man, now I really want one that looks like this.
That's it.
With the Trax flame on the front.
You know, my situation with stickers and G1 toys, it's just absolutely going to have to be a thing now. But can we, just before we go, childhood Transformers, do you still have any of your childhood Transformers? Either of you?
I've got some.
Yeah, still got Lightspeed and Lightspeed. Is it Lightspeed? The Motivator, the red one.
Yeah, with the missing tires and the missing roof.
Yeah, missing roof. He's destroyed. And also the yellow drill tank guy that was the rescue. Is it Rescue Force?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have a name.
No.
Do either of you display any of those toys?
No, I have. Well, I've sold actually a lot of mine, to be fair. But the one I do have is vintage Optimus Prime in box, but it wasn't quite childhood. It was a little bit after that. So I don't know if I would class that necessarily. I suppose I think of it as childhood because it's not from adulthood, if that makes sense. But it's not strictly from childhood either. Yeah,
no, both of mine are so knackered. They're just in a drawer. The oldest one I've got is the vintage Optimus Prime, which I've had since the 90s, and that's on display because that's just pretty.
I still have all of my childhood Transformers, the ones that weren't lost at the time or destroyed at the time. And I just think that association with childhood and the way they were played with and have always been stored, I wonder if anyone actually does display their childhood Transformers, because there's a lot of sentiment I attach to mine, and yet they're all, well, they're bubble wrapped, but they're in a tub and away and not on display. And I've never even considered bringing them here to Iceland to put them on display. But thinking about it, I'd actually really love to have a display dedicated to my childhood Transformers, because those I will, cold dead hands is what we're talking about, parting with those. Even though they're not in great condition and I own way better condition versions of those, these mint ones would always go before those. And I do wonder if anyone actually displays their childhood Transformers, or once they've got that association with childhood and the way you play with them, they just always stay that way.
It is that connection, isn't it? That's a very special connection to the toys. And I think that's what we kind of all chase, isn't it? When we are buying vintage toys, it's that same connection we had to them as children.
Thanks so much for joining us for episode 4 of Triple Takeover. If there's any sort of display solution or display mechanic that we haven't talked about, feel free to share images of your own display and tag us as well on Twitter at @triple_takeover. We'd love to see your display pictures, how you display your toys, or if you have a particularly smart way of storing them. Do you have lighting? We didn't really talk about lighting in this episode, but if you've got something fancy going on, we'd love to see it. If there's anything we didn't mention, we'd love to hear from you as well. And Sixo, where can our followers find you on social?
Well, I'm on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Wikipedia, probably. I don't know. What are the other ones? I think that's all of them. At Sixo
And Liam?
I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, probably MySpace, Bebo if that still exists, maybe there, MSN Messenger, AOL, all of those things. Just look for Toybox Soapbox.
And you can find me at TFsquareone on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And speaking of social media, thank you to everyone who's followed us, continues to support us and share our content. So many kind words, especially from other established podcasters as well in the community. It's been
that's been great.
Positively overwhelming to hear all your kind words, and even, you know, we've had people who we admire quite a lot who've mentioned the podcast, and that's just been amazing. So thank you so much for that. And obviously we'd love to continue hearing from you. Thanks once again for joining us. See you next time.